Okay, and I'm just kind of getting to the end of this basting line here, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that I make a knot and tie that off. So I'm just going to make a loop and put that needle through it and keep it close all the way down, fairly close to that fabric, and I'm going to use my fingernail to kind of help me to create that knot, and then I'm just going to trim up my thread tail there. And then what I should be able to do is I should be able to go ahead and take out all of these pins. And hopefully that basting stitch will hold everything fairly even in place while we do our machine stitching. Alright, so I'm just taking out all these pins here. And then what we're going to do is just make sure again that shoulder seam is laying fairly flat. And we're going to stitch on the top side of the sleeve, and we're going to do our stitch, and like we're going to do a regular stitch length and go ahead and place this down. Now the trickiest part is going to be to try to keep the excess fabric from folding over on top of each other. So just go slow, and we're going to, and see how this wants to kind of create this bubble here on top of the fabric. Let it stay like that. We just need this edge along the bottom to be flat so we can stitch it, but otherwise it's okay that it keeps this kind of this bubble shape. Alright, so I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to be stitching at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, so running that raw edge right along the 5/8 inch marking line. And we're going to want to do a back tack at the front and the back of this seam. So again, we're just going slow, making sure that that raw edge lines up with that 5/8 inch marking, and as I'm sewing, I'm just going to try to keep my my fabric laying fairly flat along this edge, and I'm going to try my best not to allow excess pleating to occur or folds to occur with that fabric. And if I need to, I want to come from the underneath side and make sure that that fabric is laying flat under there as well. Now if you get to a spot where you see a fold happening, lift up that presser foot, move that fabric over, kind of shift it over as much as you can, and then you can continue stitching. Use your fingers on top here to really feel and make sure that you're not having extra bulk. So that's what I'm doing as I'm stitching here, is I'm making sure that I don't feel any extra folding occurring or any like excess bulkiness from the back side. Alright, I feel something down there. Yep, so I just want to make sure that this is all laying flat underneath. So just kind of check yourself every now and then. Make sure that things are as flat as you can get them. And the key to doing this, any armhole really, is to just kind of take your time, because if you rush these steps, when we go to flip this around, you're going to see a lot of kind of pleating and tucking and just folds of fabric that are going to be gathered. So you know, take some time to save yourself some time, and just go slow. And as you can see, every now and then I'm kind of stopping, making sure that my fabric is laying flat underneath where my needle is going to be going down. Just making sure that there's no extra folding going on. I want to make sure that's laying as flat as I can. And I'm also kind of like pulling on things a little bit, not a whole lot, but if you need to kind of tug on things to get things to lie flat, that's okay. Just don't like pull it so much that your needle and thread start to skip. Alright, and then when you get to the bottom edge here, or where your stitching stops, go ahead and do a back tack. Alright, and then raise your needle and press your foot up and trim those thread tails. Now on my basting stitches, I don't think any of them came to the front side, but if you want to, you can go ahead and remove this your basting stitch that you put in there. And what you can do is you can go ahead and flip that over just to see how your seam is. So we're starting to form this sleeve onto our bodice, so hopefully you're able to see that too. But what we need to do is we need to go ahead and do another row of stitching here just to secure that armhole, because the armhole area receives a lot of stress just from you know, like everyday movement. So we want to make sure that that we have some reinforcing stitches going on. And what we can do is we can kind of do a combination of reinforcing stitches and edge finishing at the same time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stitch just the way that I was, but I'm going to change my stitches and I'm going to be doing a zigzag now. So go ahead and change to your zigzag and make this at, we don't need it to be super wide, so I think like put it about in the middle of your zigzag width area, and then we can also shrink down the stitch length. We don't really want it to be we don't want it to be spaced too big in between, so I'm going to take it down to about 1, and let's see how that goes. We can do a couple stitches and readjust if we need to. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be running the outside of my my presser foot along that stitch line that I had just sewn. So I'm just going to kind of cover it and stitch right along it for this zigzag. So let's see how close these zigs are together. I can actually probably make them a little bit wider if I want, so just make sure that your needle is up when you do this. And you can go ahead and just widen that that stitch length up. I think that will be okay. And then we're just going to do the zigzag all along the top of this sleeve seam that we just did. And if we have some folds in this, this is not the end of the world, because all we're doing is we're kind of doing some reinforcing stitches and doing an edge finish all in one. So just zigzag all along that seam allowance. Now make sure that as you go, because your bodice kind of wants to creep to the underside, that you're only stitching through those two edges here. We don't accidentally want to grab some of our bodice on the underside. If it feels a little bulky, like use the fingers of your left hand to feel that fabric, and if it feels extra bulky, you might have some of your bodice actually kind of creeping up towards the underside of your stitching that you're doing, and you want to make sure that you move that out of the way before you continue. Alright, so then go ahead and do some back stitches at the end there. And let's see how it was. Hopefully mine didn't catch any bad stuff on the back side. So just make sure that you trim up your thread tails on both ends. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come back and actually just trim off this excess fabric close to that zigzag line. Make sure that you don't accidentally cut your actual zigzag threading or your zigzag stitching, but we just want to trim up that extra fabric right along the top side of that zigzag. Alright, and just go and trim that up the whole length here. Okay, all of a sudden it kind of felt a little thick. I was like, oh no, did I catch part of that bodice? But I think it was just a thick part on that shoulder seam area. Alright, then I trimmed off the top there. Oh, missed a little bit there. Double check, make sure that like you have both both layers trimmed off even. Okay, missed a little bit there too. Then you can go ahead and just toss these little scraps. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to, in one motion, seam up the side seam as well as the underarm. So what we need to do with, let's go ahead and flip this to the outside so you guys can see your handiwork coming into motion. See how we have a nice fluid seam all along our shoulder area. And then what we're going to do is we're going to again flip everything with right sides together. So we're flipping everything with right sides together, so now our bodice is inside out. And what we need to do is we need to match up these underarm seams. And we need to make sure that these seam allowances are pushed towards the sleeve, so towards the wrist end here. And what you're going to want to do is just make sure that those underarm seams are matched up as best that you can. Hopefully you can kind of see that in the video there. I'm matching up those underarm seams and making sure that my seam allowances are pointed towards the sleeve. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in there, making sure that I'm grabbing both seam allowances on the front and the back part of the sleeve. And then I'm going to put some pins in and close up the underarm part of or the side seam of the bodice, as well as the underarm portion of the sleeve. Now, we're not going to be doing this in this step, but just know that for some shirt styles, you might see a top stitching along the top of the shoulder from the outside of the, so from like the right side of the bodice or of the shirt. So just know that like you can put in another row or another sort of reinforcing stitch to just make sure that all of these seam allowances are being held, or the seam is being held open, and our seam allowances are being held towards or in the direction of our sleeve. So just know that like that's another possibility for how you can, you know, add some detail to a shirt, or just, you know, add another row of reinforcing stitching. So what we have is we have our side seam pinned together as well as our underarm sleeve, and now what we're going to do is we're just going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch and go ahead and close this up. So I'm going to go ahead and do some back tacking at the, oop, I think I'm still in zigzag mode. Woo, you are too. Make sure you're back on the straight stitch. Go ahead and adjust that. And if you have like a one little zig going to the side, you should be able to just easily pull that out, hopefully. Let me go ahead and trim that. Sometimes that happens to me. Forget my sewing machine needs to just like be in sync with my brain. So I'm going to go ahead and run this raw edge along the 5/8 inch marking and do a back tack at the front and back of this seam. And as I approach that corner, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to manipulate this fabric so that, and kind of move it around so that my seam is really not so much taking a right angle, but it's gently curving around. So I'm gently curving that underarm as I go around, so it's not a harsh point, it's a gentle curve. And I just need to finish up this straight seam of the underarm part of the sleeve. Again, just making sure that that raw edge is running along the 5/8 inch marking. And I'm going to do a back tack at the end. And raise up my needle and presser foot and trim those thread tails. Okay, so here's what you should be able to see here, that as we came up from the bottom of the bodice, that we have a gentle curve around this corner instead of a sharp point. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do that zigzag process again, and go ahead and do an edge finish on the underarm and the side seam. So go ahead and switch back to your zigzag, and I'm going to keep mine fairly wide. Again, like I would go ahead and just do it right at as wide as it can go, and then I'm going to shrink down my stitch length to 1, and I'm going to start at the at the bottom of the waist area again, and this time I'm actually just going to move my fabric over to the right, so that I'm lining up one of these lines on my presser foot on my actual stitch line, because I want my zigzag to be a little bit closer to where that seam line is. So I'm going to go ahead and just slide that over a little bit. If where you had things positioned before is fine, then I wouldn't worry about moving yours over, but I felt like mine needed to be a little bit closer. So again, I'm just doing this zigzag stitch, and as I approach that curve, I'm going to gently curve my fabric to follow that, and then just keep up my zigzag all the way until I get to the wrist area of my sleeve. Alright, and when I get to the wrist area, I'm just going to do a quick back tack with the zigzag and raise that up and trim up my thread tails. Alright, now before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and like reset my sewing machine to be a straight stitch, just so that I don't forget. Alright, then what we're going to do is we're going to come back, and I'm just going to trim right along that zigzag stitch line again. And making sure that you just don't cut through your zigzag actual stitching threads, and then you should be good to go. So again, I'm just kind of trimming this off here, fairly close, and just not through those the actual stitches. Okay, now this is pretty much completed. What you would then do next, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and turn back your hem. It's not required for this sample, but just know that when you go ahead to turn that back, you want to make sure that your seam allowances are pressed towards the back piece of your sleeve. And then you can just do an easy stitch around the outside. And this is a fairly small armhole, so we're not going to worry about doing that stitching. But you always want to make sure that you do your hemming after you do all of your seams, so that you don't have anything sticking out from the front side of your garment. So just know that that would be the next step. We're not going to do that for this sample, but go ahead and turn everything right side out and take a look at your handiwork. As you can see, everything is seamed up as one. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go over to the ironing board and just give this a good press. Make sure that you press your seams open as best you can, so hold them open like this over the ironing board or over the pressing ham or the sleeve roll, and see if you can get that sleeve roll to fit into the sleeve. It is a small sleeve, so if we can't, it's not a big deal, but try to get those seams pressed open, or I guess pressed, and then if you're going to press them in a direction, press them towards the back of the bodice, back of the sleeve, and then you're going to label this as shirt sleeve with your name and go ahead and put it in your binder.